you're a longtime tech entrepreneur, and you've created like quite a few startups. And I wanted you to tell us what it's like, because I think there's a lot of our listeners who are probably entrepreneurs trying to do this for the first time or build a company for the first time. So what's it like to make this startup, and what is your advice?
Yeah, startups are great. They're not for everybody. I found out when I started a company and I wanted to bring in some of my friends, and this would be a perfect part. This guy's so smart, whatever. It turns out not everybody's an entrepreneur. So it takes a certain personality type to want to do that. But if you are that personality type, you probably know who you are. And if you can't stand the thought of working for somebody else, like, you're definitely a candidate. Which me, I've had a kind of a mixed career where I had a regular day job in an office downtown, and then I go off on my own. So it's the best, and I think that if you have any inclination to want to do some sort of a startup, absolutely go for it, especially when you're young. I was kind of later in life when I really got into it, and quit my day job, burn the ships, and this is what I'm doing, sort of thing. That's a little easier to do in the early part of your life than in the later part of your life. So
if you're living with your parents still, maybe
it's always good. Mooch off your parents, absolutely, and make it happen that way. But it's such a great time to do a startup. The technology is amazing, both in terms of what might be at the core of whatever product or service you're going to provide, but also the business services that are available. I mean, the last version of my company, I started like totally from scratch. And my philosophy was like to outsource everything that wasn't a core competence of the company. And the core competence of the company was a very specific technical thing that was unique to us, and it was our secret sauce. But everything else, like a website and HR and accounting and finance, all these things you have to do, just outsource it all. And their services are just falling all over themselves to get you to sign on to their subscription service for free. And don't be afraid to spend a little money to get that done. It's not that much money compared to doing it yourself in the end.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the thing that's most precious is your time.
Yeah.
And you have the opportunity to spend some money to free up more of your time. Whenever you can make that trade-off, do it. But the net of it is you can start, like, if it's a software company and you're going to make something you're going to sell off the web or as a phone app or something, these are very inexpensive companies to start. You've got some personnel costs, so you can talk your friends into working for free, and those aren't so much. You can do a lot with very little money and get out there in the market.
Yeah. Lauren and I have kind of been experiencing that. Like, so I mean, we have Railtown, our incubator and search lab. And I guess like for someone like us, we kind of have the background where we could do a lot of the stuff on our own, but you kind of have to like force yourself not to, right? Like, don't do this thing. For example, like say you want to design a logo, don't do it yourself. If you want to create a high fidelity design, don't do it yourself. Right. For someone like me, you want to create this piece of software, well, don't do it yourself. Like, it's more important that you get a team in place or find a service company that you can work with to get this done, because like the only way you scale is by like building a team up, not by necessarily doing it yourself.
Right. And at the same time though, you have to be unbelievably versatile.
Yeah.
You just got to be prepared to the fact that every 5 minutes you're switching hats, and you've got to want to be happy that do anything. And even if you're outsourcing a task, well, you have to know how to direct the person that you outsourced it to and get back from them what you want, which means you're going to learn stuff about things that you didn't even imagine you would ever know. And you got to be cool with that. And some days you'll be writing some amazing algorithm, and then 5 minutes later you're scrubbing the toilets, and you got to be cool with that. That's what it's every 5 minutes the job is different. And go for it.
Well, some people enjoy that, right? Like, some people like doing writing, and like, for example, like I do, right? Like, like you, like, I've had kind of like a weird career. Like, I've created companies, but I've also worked for small companies. I've worked for large companies, and I've kind of seen what the different things are like. And a large company, like for example, like Electronic Arts, I've done work for a couple times, right? And actually both times, like so myself and one other person, we created their one of their core platform technologies, and it's very specialized, right? It's an interesting problem, right? Especially like the scale that Electronic Arts deals with. But it's a very niche thing where you kind of get like shoved into this little hole. And if you're someone that likes to like just solve all sorts of kind of problems or figure out all sorts of stuff or understand lots of stuff, it's kind of frustrating, right? Where in a startup, you have to do everything, right? And like, you're not kidding about like, for example, like one day you're like an engineer, like designing a software engineer, designing an algorithm. The next day you're like the person cleaning the toilets or taking out the garbage or something like that. The next day you're, recruiting. The next day you're hiring. The next day you're dealing with, people issues or whatever, right? It's just really all over the place. Okay, so why don't I ask you this question? What do you think everyone should know about startups?
They should know it's the most fun thing and the hardest thing you can ever do in your life, just about. And it's worth the effort, in my humble opinion. I don't know what it would be like necessarily to be an employee at a startup company. I don't know if I'm quite that person, but to be the guy, like if you're a control freak, good, this works. But there are so many dimensions to being an entrepreneur. You won't really know till you try, and just keep your eyes open. I will say something about myself, my entrepreneurial stuff, is that the things that absolutely worked the best was where there was a problem I wanted to solve, and nobody else was solving it. And I figured it could be solved and I could do it. And I could do it better than anybody else because I cared. A lot of stuff comes out and it's really way better than anything else, not because the person's brilliant, but because they care the most. So the last big product I had to pluralizes video production software because I was doing video production as a hobby, ran into this task I had to do every time. It was driving me crazy. People were paying us. I said, I'm just going to go buy the software. It's going to solve this. Turns out nobody had solved that problem. And I thought about it and thought, this is a solvable problem. I can do it and nobody else can do it like I can do it. So I ran after it. What doesn't seem to work so well is that some people, they have this urge to be an entrepreneur and then they're just looking around for something to do. It's never worked that way for me. I said that the current project we're on with the hearing stuff is, came after my last company. There was a period in between there. It was quite some time of exploration for me. Of what do I want to do next? And it was always, what problem do I want to solve? That's interesting to me. To find the intersection of a problem that's interesting, that I care about, that maybe has a solution, and that the market might care about. There's this Venn diagram where not that many things end up in the middle there, and I'm very, selective about that. The thing I'm doing now is actually insanely hard, but it's got all those pieces kind of come together for that. And the last problem was too, it wasn't quite as insanely hard and whatever, but yeah, those things have to come together. So you can't just sort of want to be an entrepreneur, start being an entrepreneur. You need to have a problem that's worth solving. The other thing I'll say is don't be afraid to take a day job at a good company and keep your eyes open and look how it's done. My time in the early part of my career when I was at McDonald Detwater, like that company is really well run, super smart people there. Like that was the best business education you could ever have. And I'm still relying on the stuff I learned there. Don't be afraid to do that. And don't be afraid to be, that you're getting too old to do the entrepreneur thing. I was really 50 plus before I first did my real, breakout thing. I'd done some startup stuff before then, but it wasn't the same as starting from scratch. Keep your eyes open for the opportunity. Think about the problem to solve and look for that intersection of things that interest you and things that the world wants.
Mhm.
I'll maybe add a few things. Like you mentioned about like keeping your day job. Like when I was younger on and I was working on creating companies, I didn't have as much money like saved up that I could take a risk where I just didn't have an income for quite a while. And I would, for example, like have a job, and then in the evenings on the weekend I would work on something. And sometimes these things would work out and they become companies, and there'd be employees and stuff like that, which is interesting. Another thing I'll say is also if you're going to try to create a startup, most people's first companies fail. Like they don't know what the hell they're doing. Like my first company that I tried creating, I was in university still, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I lost like, I think about $20,000 of my own money, which was a lot back then.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I would have stopped then, nothing else would have happened. And I just like kept on trying. And each time I did it, I learned something. Like for one thing, I learned not to go spend a bunch of money before you have customers, for example. But as far as I know, like most people, it takes a while before they create a successful company. And if you're going to create it, like just be aware of that. Like don't give up, but take a calculated risk, right? Don't take such a big risk that you're going to be homeless, right? Like manage the risk. Like if you need to, like work a job while you're doing this, or whatever. Or if you're very, you're younger in life and still living with your parents, you don't have to worry about as many bills. The one other thing, my experience with creating companies, solving problems is a lot of times I'll be interested in a domain. Like, for example, with Lauren and I, we have a startup that's forming in the online video / streaming / video podcasting space. And when personally I was doing research in this, in my mind, I thought we'd be solving a particular problem. And just like over a 4 or 5 month period, I discovered that business is actually really crappy. And there's these other problems I discovered in trying to understand like that industry. And it led to basically, this other problem that I've discovered, all of a sudden this looks a lot better. And this is something we could work on. Okay, cool. Let's get a bit into your work history. I think most people today, they've heard the word Photoshop, right? And they've certainly heard it where, like the term Photoshopped, where it's used to mean that you have an image, like a photograph, and you kind of like change the photo digitally on a computer. And I remember the company who makes this is Adobe. And they have like Adobe Illustrator, Adobe After Effects, Premiere, and all that, and that's pretty famous. But maybe like 20 years ago or 15 or something like that, there was another company that was really big in the space. The company's name was Corel, and they had a software called Corel Draw. And you were involved with this company at one point, and I think even a vice president there. Can you tell us how you ended up at Corel and what was that whole experience like?
The path to Corel was weird, like most of life's paths are. At the time that I joined Corel, they were sort of past their heyday. Corel Draw was an enormously successful product for them. They were at a stage where they kind of needed to figure out what to do next. The market for Corel Draw was sort of falling off due to competition and other things. And they had this pretty big company to keep going, and they had a lot of talent and so on. While that was all happening, I was in a company that was working with a technology called XML, and we had some things specific to that. Very, very loosely related to anything that Corel was doing, but certainly within the universe of things they should be thinking about as they think about how to pivot basically into taking what they had and going in a different direction. In fact, they got some advice along those lines that this XML stuff is kind of cool and might fit in. So the company I was at, of which I was a part owner, we got acquired by them, and we all joined the Corel team, and that only lasted a couple of years. It eventually didn't come together. Lots of mergers and acquisitions don't work.
Tons of them.
Most of them, in fact. And so, fine, I could give a whole spiel on that, but we won't go there. But we try to find a way to bring these sort of different approaches together into something, and I thought there were some things there I thought could work, but in the end it didn't. And so I was head of the product team that was really this XML product. they said, you know what, we got to. What actually happened was they were being bought out by a private equity company, so they were getting taken over. That company seems to have done quite well. They do what private equity companies do, which is they get rid of all the things that aren't making money and they focus on the things that are, and they've actually built it up. And so, it's a path, and they seem to have executed quite well. There wasn't room for us in that picture. And so they gave us a little bit of time to find a new home, essentially, and so I led the process of that. So I was a part owner of that company. I wasn't the founder of that product group, but I became the guy who needed to sell it effectively and go along with it, and I did that. There was a couple of times that happened, basically. Blastoratus was the next home, and then that lasted a couple of years, and then there was another home, a Japanese company called Just Systems for that group. And it was around that time where I thought, okay, I've done this enough, and I got this other video thing going on, and the timing was good. I was able to kind of ramp down out of my day job, ramp up my own startup, and made that transition around then.
Yeah, you've done a lot of different things like digital signal processing, machine learning, data science, working for the big man, doing your own companies. What are some of the career highlights you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, certainly some of the most fun was back in my McDonald Detweiler days. I loved all the people there. I ended up heading up the research group there, so I had the most fun job in the company, for sure. I got to play around with all the satellite stuff, right? This was very cool. That was great. I actually liked all the jobs I had and got something out of them, and that's just part of my personality type, is that no matter what's in front of me, I can find something interesting in it that is interesting to me. It's all work. But I will say that an absolute highlight for me, and actually we've just passed the anniversary of this. So just a couple of days ago, we passed the 10th anniversary of the sale of the very first copy of this product, Pluralize. It's this video editing product. And I could tell you the exact minute when that was sold because I made a note of it. That was such a moment. This was one where I had the idea myself. I built the company up from absolutely zero to a point where I had a product to sell somebody, and they gave me money for it.
Wow.
Believe me, there's no other thrill like that in the world. It's very special.
With Lauren and I, we were involved with this. We used to be a startup. I don't think it's really startup anymore. It's called Coho. So it's like a fintech banking type app. And I remember the first time someone other than ourselves used it, and I thought that was so cool, right? Because we'd spent like months, like many months, actually maybe even like almost a year, like building this, right? And like figuring out the banking industry, right? I never built anything like that, so I had to figure out like how all this stuff works. And we built this thing. We can't actually call it a bank, so it doesn't have a banking license, but something like that. But like people were using it, and then eventually like a bunch of people were using it. Then eventually a lot of people were using this, and like we don't even know who these people are. Like that was pretty cool. So I'm guessing that's a similar experience to what you were feeling.
It absolutely is. It's a very addictive experience as well. Once you've had that moment, you just want to do it again. Obviously, we carried on with that product for a period of time. I really enjoy it. This is a direct-to-consumer type of product. Really enjoy that interaction with the customers. Loved seeing the tweets and whatever, people saying they loved it and how it saved their lives, and not literally, but changed their lives for the better. And that's a very powerful reinforcement mechanism. I want to keep going for sure. Yeah. So that's the other thing I would tell budding entrepreneurs: be aware it's addictive. You will never be able to work for anybody else after that.
Definitely. It's addictive.
But you have the chance to do great things.
So some of our kind of like more generic questions that we like to ask all of our guests at the beginning of our blogcast. what do you think are the most important trends in tech today? We talk a lot about like self-driving cars and electric cars and artificial intelligence. What do you think are some of the other big ones?
Obviously, the AI flavored stuff is near the top of any list like that. I think material science doesn't get as much attention as it should. There's some really interesting stuff going on there. I mean, we've heard a little bit about graphene and carbon nanotubes and things like that. There's some really cool stuff going on there that I think is gonna be a little under the radar for a while, and then we'll hear about things. We take for granted. I think everyone hates plastic in a way, but my God, is plastic ever an amazing thing? And it's everywhere, and it has changed the world in so many ways. So material science is a thing. Yeah, it's mostly the knowledge work stuff. Well, obviously, genomics, the CRISPR stuff that's going on is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That has always seemed to be just around the corner, and maybe it's destined to be just around the corner for a little longer. But again, the technology is amazing, and it seems like something pretty wild is going to go on there.
Yeah.
So those would be my top three.
Yeah. What do you think that others are talking about in tech? Because those are your favorite. What do you think other people are talking about?
Yeah, what are other people talking about? Well, AI's got quite the buzz, so we're aligned on that one. Yeah, maybe they talk too much about video games and the amazing tech behind video games, and I don't know, people talk about VR and
yeah, VR, AR is certainly
VR, AR type of things.
Blockchain.
They're all kind of cool. I've got a VR system at home. I love it, but
Yeah.
you know, it's not life changing in
Yeah.
its impact.
Yeah, do you think some of these are kind of overhyped?
Yeah, I think AR, if we can get it to work, could be like really great, but that seems to go a very long way away. So yeah, it's overhyped just in the sense that people think they're going to happen a lot sooner than it seems to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I think we talk about social media a lot because it's like your everyday, you know, I tweeted this, I Instagrammed this, but at the end of the day, it's just one tweet or one Instagram, and it's not, you know, it's an electric car that's going to help change our environment, you know. So I think there's a lot of trends like that in tech where we're focusing on maybe problems that aren't going to do a lot or make a big impact.
Yeah, you know, technical people think that every problem can be solved with technology, and often the hard problems are not technology. It's human psychology that comes into play, or just social interaction, and those are the much harder problems. Obviously, politics, economics, all those sorts of things. I mean, it just seems we're not getting better in those things at the pace that technology is getting better. But those are the actual hard problems to solve.
Absolutely. What else do you want to catch talk about before we ask some of the audience questions, Charles?
Okay, so what do you think could go wrong, like with any of the stuff being happened? Like think of you know, self-driving cars or AI or machine learning. Like some people, for example, talk about the AI singularity, right? Like you're going to have AI get so smart where it's basically either becomes conscious or it kind of like starts programming itself and becomes smarter and smarter and kind of takes over the world. This doomsday scenario. As like someone who's a specialist in this stuff, like I've actually spent a lot of time explaining like why a lot of that doesn't make sense to people who are kind of worried about it. And I've tried to show them like what AI is actually like. Like for example, like if you're a specialist, you know what I mean, like linear regression. Like I've showed them that like a lot of the AI is more close to linear regression than it is to us, for example. Right? And they don't have that much to worry about. But like let's look at like maybe things that actually could go wrong. Like can you think of any ways that anything in tech, like whether we talk about it or not, could actually go wrong?
It can always go wrong if there's malevolent uses of the technology, and any technology has the ability to be used for good or bad. I'm not sure that the things we're talking about today the range of technologies are particularly riskier. Like self-driving cars is a relatively benign technology, I think. The risk there is that we don't get it right and some people get hurt.
Yeah.
But, everyone's very aware of that and is working toward, mitigating that risk. The things that are the most harmful are probably things we didn't anticipate, and people do bad things. So, social media is great, but we've also got ransomware, and we've got all the negative things that are being enabled by social media and so on. And who could have predicted that when it first came out? So these things are hard to know, and you've got to be, it feels a little premature to be setting up ethics committees for AI and so on.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I kind of get like why people want to do it. I think it's a really, really, really bad idea. Not like severely bad. I think they'll probably, like, if they actually try to do this seriously and it's not just like a make work project, which a lot of these things are. I think, like, for example, if you try to enforce morals within like AI, for example, I think that could end like brutally horribly in different ways. Like, for example, if you try to take a point of view that morality is this ideal thing, right? Like the way people think should do stuff, you could get results that are catastrophic, for example. Like, I think, for example, you might take a utilitarian point of view, like, okay, let's maybe your utilities, you make everyone happy, right? And for some way of measuring happiness. And like, I'm familiar with people who are into, like, for example, what gets called positive psychology, where they try to understand happiness. And they can't actually measure happiness. So they measure what's called subjective well-being. And I think they have like 5 different ways of, 5 different concepts of subjective well-being. And they measure
just
different
ask people where they are on the scale, right?
Yeah, so that's one of them. You ask people, like, are you happy or not, right? But there's other ways to measure this. And okay, so let's say you have that. And then what you want to do is you don't care about the happiness of an individual. You care about the overall happiness of everyone. So you might tell an AI, okay, I want you to maximize happiness. Okay, well, all you're telling is, like, I want you to make that number go up. Like, we're going to, like, take everyone's happiness measurement, right? Like the happiness for everyone. And we're going to, like, compute an average, right? So we'll, count up, like, what's your happiness score? Like, say it's 5, another person 10, another person 12, another person 2, et cetera, et cetera. We'll add those up and we'll divide that by the total number of people. So we'll take an average, and you just want that average to go up. Okay, so what could an AI do? Well, it could go and find the least happy person and kill him, right? That would be brutal. That'd be, like, horrible, right? But an AI, like, it doesn't know. Well, you told it to, like, increase that number, right? And depending on the AI, it might go experiment a bit. Oh, I killed someone, that increased it. Okay, what about if I find the next unhappy person and kill them? Oh, the number goes up. Fantastic. What about the next? What the next? And, like, you have a path to actually, like, kill everyone, right? And okay, so that's one way it could be catastrophic. But let's say, for example, that what people then do is they say, okay, well, let's look at what morality actually is, right? Like, not from the philosophical point of view. Let's look at, like, from the behavioral science point of view. And a lot of the stuff of what morality is along selfishness, right? And not say it's malicious, right? Like, you're trying to harm people. Like, cooperation is a type of selfishness, right? It's where I get what I want, you get what you want, she gets what she wants, et cetera, et cetera. And we're all better off from being in the situation than not, right?
Yeah, it's enlightened self-interest, but it's still self-interest.
Yeah, but it's still self-interest. And if you create an AI that actually does what morality does, and it does it in a certain way, like, basically it might not need any humans, for example, right? And it might, it's like, well, I'm going to get my self-interest, right? And it might also result in catastrophic result where it ends up killing people or doing all sorts of other things, right? Also, it actually gets kind of interesting if you think about this. If you start to look at where, for example, like, AIs might be involved in breeding humans, right? Like, so for example, if you have selection of embryos, or you have CRISPR involvement in editing cells and stuff like that, or genomes, you get very horrible results if you try to force something like these, like ethics and morality, whatever you want to call it, politics, ideology. I mean, it's all the same thing. It's just different names for it. Some of them are looked on positively, some of them negatively. If you try to force this onto AI, very likely you're going to end up in catastrophic results, because morality, I don't think it is what most people think it is. But anyways, that's a bit of a tangent.
Yeah, but you always have to be aware of unintended consequences for anything like that.
Yeah.
And I think the bad things that have happened from technology were not anticipated, and you could have put a whole bunch of rules around things, and it wouldn't have stopped the actual problems.
Mm-hmm.
There's some sort of balance there. At some point, you've got to say, no, you're not allowed to do this with the technology. But to try to anticipate that too much is probably going to cause more trouble than it's worth. As I said before, I'm a technology optimist. I think technology is going to make a better world for all of us, continue to make a better world for all of us, on balance, much better. There will be some negative things that happen, undoubtedly, because humans are just that way. But mostly it works. If you want to really scare yourself, though, with the type of scenarios that Charles just mentioned, you should definitely read the book by Nick Bostrom on superintelligence. It's like,
I haven't read that yet.
Oh, you'd love it. It's you'd sort of love it and hate it because he's describing every dystopian future ever. He's a really smart guy. He's a good writer, and it's like if you don't think about it too hard, if you're not close to what's actually going on, you come away from that like really scared and just horrified at where things might end up. And I sort of had that initial reaction to it, but now that I know more about what's actually going on, and I see, it just seems very unlikely that things are going to evolve that way. And again, we are aware of it. It's good that he writes a book like that, because then everyone could be sort of thinking about where things might go. And as long as you don't jump in too soon to try to set a direction, it's probably good to just keep that awareness and put a lid on it at the appropriate time.
Cool. So here's a question. Like whenever I'm, let's say I'm doing all sorts of different kinds of work, I find it's useful to ask people after I've asked them a whole bunch of questions. What question should I have asked you but didn't?
You didn't ask me what I had for breakfast this morning.
What did you have for breakfast?
I have a very utilitarian approach to food. So I eat almost the same thing every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, except like if I'm out and I have to eat in a restaurant, whatever. But if I'm left to my own devices. So what did I have? Fruit with some yogurt on it, spinach omelet.
Okay.
Which I make. There's a nice ritual to making a spinach omelet for yourself. That's part of the starting the day that I kind of like. Yeah, I like that. But it's a good mix of stuff. It kind of fills you up. And then lunch I have some nuts for lunch, and then for dinner it's especially weird though. At my household, we just throw all the vegetables we've got into a big Vitamix and blend it and make this soup. And that's what we eat for dinner, like basically every day.
Is that kind of the uniform approach to food to kind of save time?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is that. It's the same reason I always wear blue shirts. I find a shirt that I like and it fits and stuff. I immediately go back and buy 10 more, so I never have to think about shirts again.
I actually do that also. So like, for example, like I'm actually wearing a blue shirt, but this one I think I have 4 or 5 copies of. And then there's like a handful of other shirts. Like I have this checkered one, I have a blue pinstripe one, I have a green pinstripe one, I have black, like a bunch of different ones. And I actually have like 5 copies of each, for example, which is kind of interesting. So I do something very similar.
Similar to Obama and Zuckerberg.
They're the same? Yeah. He always wears the same thing, right? Yeah. Zuckerberg, Obama, yeah. I mean, it's just like, I'm just not into clothes or food. Like, it just doesn't like, I eat to live. I don't live to eat.
Yeah.
I think I'm a little bit of the opposite.
Which is fine. Whatever works. I get my jollies other ways.
So Bruce, is there any other question I should have asked you but didn't? And yeah, it's okay if the answer is no. But is there anything else?
You could ask if we're hiring.
Are you hiring?
Not really. But I have a motto, which is ABC, which is always be recruiting.
Wait, shouldn't that be ABR?
Yeah, it doesn't work as well. The R is silent. The RE is silent. But it's again, this is sort of advice to entrepreneurs, I guess. People are everything, and you want to gather interesting people around you. Either as employees or partners or just advisors or friends, whatever. It's all about accumulating interesting people. Absolutely. Which is hard for many technical people, and include myself. I'm not a natural social person. And so I have to really make myself do things to accumulate people in my circle. But it's always worth it. And it's what it's all about.
Finding the right people is really important as well.
And you can, if you find the right person, you can build a whole company around that person.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
And for the lack of the right person, a whole company can fail, even though it's a good idea and there's a market and all these things. If you can't find, the pivotal right person, it can just not come together.
For some startups at least, they sometimes call that the first employee, for example, if they're not a founder, right?
Yeah.
And they usually give them a sizable portion of the company, depending on the person, 5%, 10%, it just kind of depends.
Yeah.
I've heard of people who do less. The risk for less is that they think of themselves as an employee and they think of this as just a job. And that if someone offers them more money, or they're just, they want to do something else, they'll leave. It's usually that equity is there to make them feel like a founder,
Right.
make them feel invested, make them pour their heart and soul into it, and also stick with it until it's sold or successful or whatever.
Yeah. And you have to set that up carefully because you're kind of getting married, so you want to date a little bit first.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure you're right for each other and so on. But super important. And I think it is important to be really fair to employees and to give them a piece when that's appropriate and get them aligned and engaged and all that stuff. It's just, there's so many dimensions on which you have to be good at the HR thing to make it work. It's super important.
Yeah.